So one of the features that we do have in Harmony is we can add deformers. So when we add deformers, they're referred to as bones. And here we have the controls for that. And the way that we can start adding rigging, so I have this basic drawing shape, so I click on it and now I can add in bones. So I click for the starting point of the bone. That's where it will be able to move from. And now I can click at some other point to add in another control, and finally I'll add in a handle. Now, to modify these, when I'm using the rigging tool, I can go in and I can move where this bone is going to be. So each segment here is a bone, and the circle is going to be my area of influence. So when we look at this, we can see it added those bones to this drawing layer. So now we can see that structure of I have three bones, bone 1, bone 2, and bone 3, well, bone 1, bone 2, so kind of bone 0, and then my drawing that is going to be affected by that. Now I'll just extend out my timeline, and if I want to animate this, I can now simply use my transform tool, and now back here at frame 1, if I were to grab this, I can move the whole thing. I grab, well, now they're all selected. If I just grab one segment and now move, you'll see how it creates a deformation in the bone. So if I start with this right here on that first frame, I'll move out 10 frames, and I can now pull that back down. We'll see that we get a basic movement to it. Now at this point in time, if I go and select this bone, here, now I'm going to select that bone and pull it down. So we can see though the second bone, because its keyframe started here and there was no beginning keyframe, that's why it moved to that position. So if I were to take that keyframe and just simply pull it back to here, and now I can take this keyframe further out, pull this down, and this is also one of those, sometimes it works best so you don't get unexpected movements to keyframe the whole thing as you go. So we're able to do bending movements. Now, something to keep in mind with this is this works great on a solid shape. But if I have a shape that is a little bit less than solid, and let's go, I just want to verify my paint properties here. I'm going to select paint behind right now and go to my drawing layer. So we can see some interesting things happen with that. Now let's go back to frame 1 and see where we are. Now if I go to drawing, we can see here is the drawing. This is what the artwork looks like without any bone movement. And once you start animating with any type of armature, it sometimes will become useful to, and let's undo that, and just shrink my brush down a little bit so I can make some finer marks so we can see what happens when I do movements with a lot of visual texture or color. How does this respond when I start animating? So we can see we get some weird folding that can start happening with it. And one thing that we can do is go in with the rigging tool, and you can modify how that circle is affecting. Oh, now let's go back out of the rigging tool. So we can see it gives less of a sharp bend when I extend that out. So when your artwork is following the direction, like these marks, of the object, it works pretty well. But if we start having other shapes or marks occurring within, you may start to see we get some weird bunches. But on this one, it seems I am getting kind of lucky with this. Now, this is the core, the beginning part of working with bones. And it works pretty slick. But if I were to have a whole character, I'm just going to turn that off. We'll add in a new drawing. I'm just going to go back and choose my neutral color just because it works quickly. So if I had, just kind of create a lollipop person. So when we have a lollipop person like this and want to use some version of an armature with them, what we will find is it does not work really well if we have trying to attach lots of bones to a complex character. So could I add a whole skeleton to this? Oh, where did that layer go? I don't want that layer part of this one. I want it free. There we go. All right, so so I have a basic character right there. Now if I go and grab the rigging tool, decide I want to put in some bones, I can go click, 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 and then what I need to do is go back and select the drawing so I don't have any bones selected, and now I can go click, click, click. Again, select the drawing, click, 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 and rinse and repeat. Click, click, click. So I have all of these different bones that are attached to this same character. Now, if I want to animate this character over time, it's going to get a little bit difficult as I work with these different bones that are set here. And let's just extend everything out. Function F5. All right. Go back to the beginning. Function F6. Insert my keyframes. So now you'll notice we're getting some weird thing. Wow, this is trippy. Okay, so surprising. Whoa, yeah, we don't want to do that. Yeah, this is some seriously trippy stuff going on here. So you can see how these deformers are grabbing what almost appears to be random points or edges on these objects. So this leg's working okay right there. Let's see if its thigh. Whoa, yeah, so that thigh is grabbing part of that foot. So if you're going to set up an armature for a character, what you need to do is you need to break it into pieces. So you separate the arm into a layer, add the bones to it, separate the other arm into a layer, add the bones to it, or multiple layers, depending on how you're going to do it. But when we're using bones, it typically works better than single layered items, though we can do kinematic outputs, which we'll look at in just a moment. So I've created a couple more layers of artwork, and I have my body, we have an arm, we have another arm, and I have a hand. So what works better? when we are trying to work with armatures or bones is to add the bones using the rigging tool to individual body parts. So now I can add this arm right there. Now I'm going to go and click on the other arm, and I can click here, here, and here. Now if I go to my hand layer here, I'm going to verify I have moved the transform point, my pivot point, to the base of the hand to the wrist. So that's good. Alright, so what we can do with the hand, because I want the hand to be attached to the arm, but I want the hand to be able to move independently. And there's a way we can do that. And the way we do that is inside our layer panel here. I am going to select the hand and choose Kinematic Output. When I do that, it adds something, it looks just like a bone down here. But what we're going to do, let's just bring this up a little bit so we can see more of what's going on. So we have, this is arm 2 over here we're working with. And I'm going to now take this kinematic output that is part of the hand, and I'm going to now attach that to the arm. So now, if I use my transform tool, we can see the hand moves with it, but the hand is not being distorted in the process. So this kinematic output allows us to attach this element to it, and then I can take the hand and I can animate the hand independently. And I can even go so far as, here, let's just collapse this, and I'll extend it out. Function F5, not F6. Get rid of that. Function F5. And we'll just minus the key, well, the keyframe's gone now. Okay, and might as well bring the body and arm over there as well. Function F5. So this other arm, which has these bones, this is the arm on the left, it's right there. So now I can go to this arm, F6, this arm, F6. And now if I move these arms, they're not going to mess up the rest of the body. So we can see nothing is being moved with it as we go through here. Now if I go right here, I'm going to pull this arm down, pull a little bend in it, go to the hand, pull that up like that, and then let's see, we'll move out here a little bit more in time. I'm going to bend, pull it out, and this hand has additional hands that I've drawn in it. So I can now swap to a different hand. So we'll swap to the thumbs up hand right here. So we can go thumbs up, and then we'll rotate this hand up, or arm up. I'm going to rotate the hand out and cycle through to that hand there. So we're able to do drawing substitution. I can do my bends, and with these bones, my character is not, I'm not getting that weird effect that happened, like what we saw when I put all the bones onto one layer. So using this can give us some really easy to animate methods, and we'll look at some ways that we can do that with more complex artwork in the future. So the next thing we're going to look at is using effects. Now if I want to use an effect, I can look under effects and see what options are there. First I want to just choose one layer. So I will choose this top layer here, the red. And then we'll go under effects, and the first one I'm going to look at is using transparency. Now when I use transparency, it added in that transparency, it defaults it to 50%. So we can see how it now allows me to see through that layer. Now if I have a rigged character composed of multiple layers, it's going to be problematic if I do it this way because I'm going to see all kinds of overlaps at the joints and things like that. And we'll look at that in just a moment. But first, I want to demonstrate how we can keyframe this transparency. So the way transparency is measured is 0 to 100. And it's how much transparency is being applied. So if I enter 0, we can see there is no transparency being applied. Now if I go here and enter a number and I could say 100, and now it's fully transparent, so we can see that effect happening before our very eyes. So we're able to generate that transparency. Now it's keyframeable, so we can just keep changing the number to whatever value we want it to be. So I could go up, I could, go in between, go here. So let's see, what do we have? We have going up, and now let's pull. I'm just going to pull that way down so we get this kind of strobing of transparency. Okay, so we can see how we can apply that to a color. So we can animate it, we can apply it. It is what it is. Now, if I want to apply transparency to multiple layers so that we don't get weird overlapping things happening, because if I have a whole character where each arm and leg and each facial feature is on a separate layer, it's not going to work if I apply it individually to each layer. So first I'm going to ditch that out of there, and instead I'm going to show a different thing we can do. So I can select multiple layers. And I can take those layers and I can right click on them and choose Group Selection. So with those selected, if I go, I can also find Group under here, but we'll see that Group Selection isn't available here. That group applies when I'm selecting different pieces of artwork on the stage itself. So right click down here, Group Selection, it turns it into a group. Now I can click the minus and it puts it there, and we'll just call this is my transparency group. And now if I take that effect and apply it to it, we can see where it's now going to apply it to the whole of it. So you may be thinking, wait, he just said it's not going to do exactly what we see here. But this isn't the finished view of our scene. And this is something that anytime we're working with any of these effects, we're going to have to be switching from our standard OpenGL view into the render view, and this will show the final output with the effects. Now the problem is if I'm in that view, I can't just hit play and watch my animation take place. So as I look at the transparency here, and we can see that it's at 50, what I'm going to do is add a base layer so we can have some additional artwork here so we can better see how that transparency is affecting our scene. So we'll put in some blue and just grab some other colors so we can better see that how that transparency is indeed working across the scene. And we'll even put in so we have a number of different colors that we see right there. Let's just extend that out so they will exist and pull it beneath. Alright, so that gives me a background to work with. Now if I switch the view here, the OpenGL, we're going to see that the transparency is working a little bit different now. Oh, and when I changed I didn't mean to change red to, yeah, no wonder those are blending. It's the same red. I meant to use a different color on the drawing. I'll use that pink because that caused a little bit of confusion as I was initially wondering what just happened. So now when I look at the transparency, we can see how it's affecting it, and this is different than the OpenGL view. So if my object is here, transparency of 49, now we'll just put in a keyframe for that, and go here, and we'll go transparency of 73, transparency of 0, transparency of 50, transparency of 100. So remember, we're applying transparency 100%. So we can see how I see the red and green stripes here when I'm in my OpenGL view. But in my render view, we can now see as I move through each of these things how the transparency is not showing me those seams or overlaps. So this is one of the challenges when you work with effects inside of Harmony is you will have to continually be switching between your OpenGL view, which allows you to hit play and watch the animation. So if I hit play here, we can see, oh, that was nothing. We don't see anything happen. So if I want to render this out so that I can see those effects, I hit the render and play option. Now just be warned, if your movie is long, you may want to cut down the section of frames that you are currently working on, because otherwise it's going to be really, it takes a while, but also it can take up a lot of disk space. So you'll be surprised that as you create these rendered frames, it's creating a PNG file, or not PNG, but it's creating a graphic file for each frame, and your project folder, you'll be like, how did it get so fat, and why is it taking up so many megs and megs, hundreds of megs, or even a gig of disk space? You'll be like, what is going on? So this goes pretty quick because the artwork is pretty simple, and now the first time through it's loading those frames. We can see the animation happening, and then I can just simply hit play, and then it plays at real time. So there my transparency looks correct. I can test my animation and see how it looks. So that's using the render and play option, which is something we haven't really talked much about. But when we start using effects, we have to use it, or at least be switching between these different views so we can see what is going on while we are working. Don't forget, putting on the frame can be useful. It shows you where is your camera area, so you get a better sense of your camera view, which is similar to working with the render view, so we get to see how that finished frame works out. So with the render view, if I click from frame to frame, I will see what it looks like, but I don't have the ability to scrub my timeline and play. We can see it holds, and then when I stop, it will show me what that next view is as it's rendering it, telling me, hey, we rendered it out over there, and we're able to accomplish it. Now when you start stacking in a bunch of these effects, those render times can take quite a while, even just for a handful of frames. So I've created another layer and just built a little simple spinning animation into it. The next effect I'm going to look at here is blur, and we can see where it's now applied that blur, and or it's put the blur effect on. Now if I switch over to my render view, we can see how that effect is showing up. So I'm going to first start out with that blur, and we'll just say I want it to be 0, so there is no blur. And now as I work across time, I'm going to change that blur up to 50, and we can see that it really gets blurry. So now as this spins, we can see it's growing increasingly fuzzy as it's dissolving. But if I look here, no change. So when I am in my open GL view, no change. But if I want to see that blur, I have to go into my render view to see what is happening. So I've created another layer with these two green stripes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that as the matte. Now the matte becomes the mask area in which this effect is going to be applied. So when we have matte as an option, it says drop layer here. Well, that's easy enough. I click on the layer and I drop it right there. We see it now puts the name right there. Now we also don't get to see that layer anymore because it's now hidden with it. And I mean, I can even tack it on so it becomes a child of that. So then we're going to see as we go through here, it takes on the same, actually I don't want to make it a child of it yet. But as I go through, and remember I'm in render view, not in, if I'm in the OpenGL view, look at this, no change. But if I am in my render view, we'll see that in those two stripes, that's where that effect is visible. Outside of those two stripes, we see the artwork untouched. So the matte is the area in which that, or mask, where that effect, this blur effect, is going to take place or be part of the artwork. So as I step my way through here, we can see how that works. And sometimes if you use the period and comma, you can cycle through one frame at a time. It's pretty tedious. If you have a better graphics card on your computer, this certainly goes faster, but it gives you that sense. If you can see how that blur effect is, the blur is increasing as we worked our way across. So if I go back, the blur becomes less as it's now trying to kind of cache render each of these frames. So once they're in memory, holds it a little bit. It's not like doing the RAM preview in After Effects where once you've loaded it into memory, it's there. So we can apply the blur. We can change the radius of the blur. We can apply a matte to it, and that affects then the area that it's going to show up. And if I go back to my normal view, then we can see we get to watch our animation, but we don't get to see the effect in our finished product. And if I do render and play, do you want to replace those frames? Sure. Now we let it load. And it launches, the frames load, and we can see how they are loading. And now I can hit play and watch it play in real time. The blur shows up, and we can see it's only blurring inside the matte or mask area that we have indicated in our project. So now I'm going to again take the blur and its matte, and I'm going to group that. That allows me to just keep adding these to this same project and not have to worry about turning on and off lots and lots of layers. So similar to how we used the matte to control how an effect could render on our scene, we can also use one of the effects called a cutter. So under effects we have an option called cutter, and cutter really is about making a matte or a mask. So I've set up project here. So I have my face colored in the whites of the eyes. Now I have a layer I'm calling eye matte because I'm going to be using that as the matte for that cutter so that I can take the eyes and animate the eyes and move them so that they stay within the confines of the face. And then I put the highlight here because the highlight always will sit on top of the eye, and the highlight doesn't change when the eyes move because the highlight is based on the surface of the eye. I mean, it moves a little bit because the eye isn't perfectly round It does bulge a little bit at the pupil and iris, but for all intents and purposes, the highlight should stay in place unless the head changes position. But if it's just the eye moving and the head's not moving, then the highlight really shouldn't move. So now what I want to do is add a copy of the whites of the eyes. So I'm going to hide these two layers, and I'm going to select that shape right there and this shape right here, so the two shapes that are part of the eye. So I'm going to select those items. Hang on. And apparently I have this selected. That layer is not doing anything, so we'll just unselect it. So I've selected these two shapes. And I need to make sure I'm not down here choosing copy. So the red area, so I have focus on mouse enter, so when I move to each of the areas, the red box shows me what is my active window. Because when I use copy paste commands, I have to be certain I'm not copying whole drawings or keyframes as I would if I copy pasted in the timeline. I have to be in the camera window here or even in the drawing view, but I want to be in the camera so I can copy something from one layer and add it to another layer. So I'm going to select those two eye shapes and I'm going to copy them. I still want the whites to stay there, but I want to now put a copy of those on my matte layer. So now I've made my matte layer the active layer, and then I focus on mouse enter up here, and in case you forgot, under preferences, it is this checkbox right here, focus on mouse enter. It's under our general preference. Okay, so with that IMAT selected, this layer active, I can use the key command paste, Command or Control V, and it pastes it in to that layer. Now we do need to make sure it lines up to where we want it to be, because this is going to be the matte that we use. And just to show that this is not the same item, I'm going to even fill it with red right now. Oh, hang on. No wonder it didn't work. I need to unhide that layer. That would be why it's not working. So go and make sure that that layer is active. Now I can go here, focus on mouse enter, paste, and now it puts it in the correct spot. And if I click off, I'll see it has now added that drawing to it. With the paint bucket, we will make sure we're filling IMAT with red. So I forgot because I turned off layers to turn that layer back on. So my bad there. Now I can go back to the pupil and iris, and we can see the red is there. That might be disturbing to or problematic. I kind of like it now. I might go back and recolor the original face, because once we use this as a matte, it's not going to show anymore. So we can go back and color it. So I'm going to go to my iris pupil layer, go under effects, and choose cutter. Now we can see it adds a cutter to it. Now if I expand that, it says drop layer here for what is going to be the matte for that. So I just simply drag that layer up here and it puts it in. Now it kind of looks like, with the highlight on the eye, that, oh wow, we got these kind of globe eyes, but we see that sticking out. And what is going on with that? So if I double click on the star and go into the cutter, we can see that the matte is hiding things. I want to invert it, so I want the matte to be the area that we see everything else to be hidden. So now I invert that matte. So sometimes we want the matte to be the positive, other times we want the matte to be the negative. And that's just how it is. So now we've added in that effect, that cutter, we've set the eye matte there. We can see that the red is now gone, but I kind of like the red. We might bring it back. And if I grab my transform tool for doing some animation, if I click on the eyes and want to move these, we will see that they stay completely within the face. So I'm going to start with the eyes right here in the center. Let's extend these layers out so we can do a little bit of animation. So Function key F5 on that. We have the eyes right here. And we'll go over a few frames. And now I'm going to go select the eyes and I'm going to move them over here. Now I'm going to pull them down and then I will move them over here. Now if your face is set up so that the view you have requires the eyes to move independently, well then you will have to repeat this process for both the left and the right eye of establishing the mats and cutters as two separate layers. So if your left eye and right eye are on separate layers, then you would need to do that. So now if we want to watch this animate, we can see how the eyes stay within. And by having the highlight not on the pupil and iris layer, but on the eye itself like that, it really does look like the eyes are moving in the face here. So this is an easy way that we can then animate something using a mat or a mask, which in Harmony is called a cutter. Building upon what we've learned using some basic rigging using the inverse kinematics or bones, as well as using different effects, we're going to take this project and do a little bit of basic animation. So the first thing I'm going to do is to set up the eyes with a cutter. So I'm going to click on my eye layer because the red is not because our child is crazy, because we can see this is what the child looks like, but is the mat that we're using. So I'm going to go to the eyes and I will add in a cutter effect. And when I add in that cutter effect, I need to expand that and then drag my mat there. And then remembering, once again, we need to double click on the star next to it and invert the cutter so that we can see it work. So now if I go to my eye layer and wish to move it around, we can see how the eyes move within the head but do not protrude out from the rest of it. So that's our first step, getting everything up and running. Don't really need this color card now that I've added in an image for the background. What I'm going to do to the head layer is I am going to add in a little bit of rigging to it. Now, going back to previous conversations on different body parts should all be on separate layers. Because the amount of movement I intend to do here is very minimal, I can get away with adding both armatures to the same layer. So I don't have to separate the ears from the head. I want to be able to make my ears wiggle a little bit. Now, if I wanted to do more, I would separate the mouth, nose, and ears all from the base head. So I could add armatures to all of them and then get some deformations to add in some character. So I'm going to click here, and then I'll click here, here, and finish at the tip of the ear. I'll go back, click on the head layer once more so I can click, and then I will click here, here, and once more at the tip of the ear. Now I'm going to adjust this a little bit. I want to move it down more so it's going to be affecting the middle of the ear. Pull this up, pull this over. So I'm trying to envision how I want these to affect my layers for animation purposes. So now that I've added those bones in, I can switch over to my transform tool, and I can see where I can wiggle the ear, or I can wiggle the ear, and we can see because it's only affecting this area, it's not affecting the rest of it. So we can see at this point, that's going to be problematic if that's what I want to do with that. So that tells me with the rigging tool I may want to, let's try and pull this down over here a little bit, adjust that bone, move that over. Now let's go and grab once more and see. So we don't want to grab that bone, but as long as our anchor bone is going to be set pretty close. So that tells me with the rigging tool I will want to adjust this point, pull it much closer so then it's not going to be affecting it, and then I can pull this out, pull that out. Let's grab our transform and see. Okay, so that's affecting the cheek. Let's go adjust a little bit more, pull it back, and I think even let's pull that down, rotate. So we're trying to adjust or change what. So this works pretty well. We can wiggle the ear there. We can wiggle. So we don't want to grab that bone. So we can grab this bone. Doesn't affect the face. I can grab this. And see his ear is now waving at us. Now if we go too far, we can see where we get weird puckering of things happening, but we could do some pretty fun stuff with that. Now if I grab the point, we can see how we can adjust as we're moving it. So, not bad. So now I know that those all work. I'm going to select those keyframes that were there and just delete them because now we're back to our neutral view. So I've added in the bones, got those configured for the ears. So they're going to give me the amount of movement I want to put a little bit of personality in here. Then we have the head separate from the robe. So what I want to do next is I'm going to add in a peg. This peg is going to be my head peg. And let's pull it all the way up. Actually, what works best when I've added pegs, they always seem to be a little bit annoying to grab up, so I'll pull those layers onto it. Now when I pull that to the top of the stack, it now sits at the top. Now I've put that peg there. I'm going to go into my controls and I'm going to locate my transform. I'll put it kind of where the base of the head would be so that if we rotate and want to get a little bit of kind of head wiggle, we can do that to the child. So that gives me what I need for the head. And in case you're wondering, this was the original drawing that was put in as I was roughing in. So that layer is not really doing anything anymore. So we have the head. I have the rope layers here. The rope is split into two. We have the shadow area behind it, then the main part up front. So then when I move the head, it's able to work with it and go in between if I want, so I can even get the robe. If I grab the head and pull it down. So one thing when we're animating, if I want to animate with pegs only, I do have an option I can click so that it selects only pegs. So now when I click, it selected the peg. So when I grab the head and okay. So we can see the head goes in front, but if I take the robe layer, put the robe layer on top, oh, I don't want the robe layer active, now I want to go back to the head. You can see how I can now bring the head. So I probably want to erase this little corner right there, my artwork, and move that over. That revealed itself as we do this. So let's grab the eraser. Let's get rid of that little corner. Now, again, we have limitations on where I can move the head. so I have to be careful where I move it, but we can, now I could even put a little bit of neck in there, but I don't think I've ever seen the neck on the child, so we're not going to put the neck in. But maybe I'll start with the head, and now we can sink it down with the ears, then sink the head. So I'm going to start with the head a little bit more upright as my starting position. So this allows me to kind of organize my animation. So at this point, let's extend these layers out. So they've been extended out, ready to go. Now if I want to animate this character here, I'm going to start out first with, I don't want to choose the eye, so I'm going to turn off my peg selection mode there. I think I'm going to have to open this up a little bit so then I can select the eyes because I want to animate those. And start with the eyes. I'm going to move the eyes over here first, so he's looking off to the right, and then I'm going to have the eyes move to the side over here so we can see the eyes are moving. Now if I deselect, we can see how the child is moving the eyes. And the next thing that I want to do at this point, after the eyes have moved, I'm staging in sequence the movement of my character. So at this point I want to insert a keyframe for the head peg, and I want to pull now the head down a little bit. I'm going to pull the head down so it starts to go into the robe a little bit here. So the head is going to sink. And now, at this point, I'm going to start animating for the ears. Now, to animate for the ears, I need to grab, anytime I'm animating bones, I have to use my transform tool. And what I want to do for the entire head here is insert a complete keyframe for this. And this guarantees that all the bones are going to then have the necessary keyframe for it. So I'm going to pull that bone down just a little bit and grab here. We'll pull this bone down just a little bit. And I'm realizing I almost want the ear now to be on a separate layer so it's in front of the collar, but we'll live with it for now. So we can see the head goes here. So I can pull each ear down a little bit. And for that matter, we can make it, have a little bit of fun with it so that the child is going to do a little bit of ear wiggle so that they're not moving symmetrically but are moving opposite from each other. And then we may, as I move to the final frame, have both ears drop just a little bit more. If I grab the end point, I can even pull them in. So the ears can now, so you can see the eyes have moved, the ears have moved. I've been able to animate the whole of it. Now, I think after the head has come down and right as the ears are starting to go, I'm going to insert keyframe right here, and for this I'm going to then go and rotate the whole head just ever so slightly, as well as click back here. I want to pull it up just a hair. So I'm just trying to create a little bit of life into my child character. So that's the first thing that we can do. Now if I want to take and apply an effect to this, one of the things that we will have to be aware of when we're working with these effects is sometimes I can't stack effects. So if I grab, say, transparency and glow and color scale, we get some really unpredictable, weird results happening. So that is just a point to keep in mind with it. But if I want to apply an effect to all of the layers that comprise my character, once again, select all those layers, right-click, group selection, and now that groups it. Now I'll just call this child G. So that's now my grouped child. So with that child grouped here, now I can apply different effects. So if I did want to, say, apply transparency to this, now we get transparency, and if I click over here, we can see at 50%, that's what my child looks like as it goes transparent. So maybe as we're doing this, this is where put in a keyframe, so we're at 50% here, and I want to be 50% at the end, so we'll add another keyframe in there, because now at this keyframe I don't want to be at 50, I want to be at 0% transparent, so I only want to fade out as it goes on. So if we go into the normal view here, we don't get to see things quite, we can watch it animate in. Transparency, we can watch that effect. We don't have to be in our WebGL view, or our render view. We can watch the transparency take effect. So, alright, so we got transparency working. Now if I go into the child once more and go here, and let's add another effect, and this time I will add in a glow. Wow. That just got really weird. So this is where when we start trying to stack these effects, things get a little bit wonky. So we're going to have to do some work to try and get this to behave properly. If I switch over into my view here, we'll say, whoa, what is going on? And this is where we're going to have to do some work to get things to behave in our project. So what is happening is the glow is being applied to the transparency. So we need to adjust things a little bit. So now if I change the order, so I have glow, then if I have transparency, I can see that I'm looking through my child, but the child is glowing. Now, when we look at the glow, we can see what the color is, and our values are 0 to 255. So if we turn up the blue and then maybe turn down the red, we can see where we're starting to get a glow. And if I were to then put in a radius value here, let's say 5, or 50, we can see how we start to get a glow, and it's starting to look almost like we have, well, we're glowing here, but we're opaque, still opaque, fading, fading, fading. So maybe what we'll want to do is as we fade out, this is where we can apply the glow. So I want this glow to be full right here, so I'll click at the end, add in a keyframe, and I'm going to go to this opening keyframe right here, add in a keyframe, but this time let's modify that glow property, and we can find the properties down here as well. And if I grab my intensity, say 0, the intensity of the glow is going to pick up as our child transforms into a force ghost, which would be really sad because the child is still just a child. It's only 50 years old. So we don't really want that to happen. So the properties, by double-clicking on the star, we get the properties here. It's sometimes easier if we're keyframing them to access them down here. And we can find the values as we are working with them. So as you apply multiple effects, you have to apply them a little bit differently or change the order as you stack them, because how they stack will have an impact on that finished result. So now what I can do is just click out, yes, I'll replace the frames that were there. Now the rendering of this does take a little bit longer because it's having to render out those effects. So as it gets to the later frames, it slows down. Again, if you have a better GPU, you will get faster render times. But now when this pops up, I can see how our child is glowing. And you can animate that glow as I animated the glow in, but you could make it so it's a pulsing glow. We have transparency. I can see the landscape, or kind of a double sun landscape occurring in the background. So it's definitely possible to create some rich animations using effects in Harmony.